It all began 1,000 years ago, during the war against the Demon King. On the day when the demonic beasts stormed across the front lines to slaughter humanity, it felt like the start of another overused tale, one seen countless times before. But let's continue. Soon you'll see how this story is unique. So, the blood-soaked war dragged on, endless and brutal, with humanity clinging to survival. The battlefield never dried, every inch drenched in crimson, while the beasts slowly thinned out. Then, without warning, a figure appeared atop a black dragon. That was the moment the legendary Mage entered the stage. With terrifying ease, he wiped the battlefield clean, crushing the horde in a single strike. The dragon's presence alone was enough to paralyze the beasts with fear, while soldiers fell to their knees in worship of the hero. But victory turned to shock. Out of nowhere, the Mage collapsed, lifeless. At the exact moment, triumph was his. His death remained a mystery. Before the end, he left behind a promise. He would await the one consumed with the thirst for strength, the one who would never fall to temptation or corruption. The scene snapped to the present. Inside a subway, all eyes were locked on the screen broadcasting a UFC fight. It was the 17th title defense of the reigning world champion. The crowd around the octagon went wild, voices uniting in a roar for the challenger. In the blue corner stood Patrick, the challenger, 120 kilos of carved muscle, built like a bodybuilder, the audience urging him to kill. Opposite him, in the red corner, was the champion, 37 wins, 0 losses, a man who had never tasted defeat. His body was honed to perfection. They stared each other down. The announcer pointed out that Kim Jin-ho hadn't been using his foot much lately. Rumors spread fast. Patrick himself had claimed the champion must be injured and that today would be the day the streak ended. Whispers filled the arena. Jin-ho was 48 years old. No man could keep winning forever. The bell rang. Patrick froze. He hadn't even moved, and yet the champion's presence was crushing, suffocating. Terror radiated off the man like heat. Still, Patrick knew about the injury. He darted forward, aiming low for a takedown, ready to slam the champion to the mat. Confidence surged. This arrogant bastard had stepped into the cage injured, and now he would pay. But just as Patrick's hands brushed the leg, just as his grin spread in triumph, light tore through the air. Blood exploded across the cage, and in that instant, everything was over. Patrick was wrecked in the cage. Kim Jin-ho had held back his leg on purpose. Otherwise, the fight would have been too easy. Pure arrogance, dripping from every move. Later, in the locker room, he threw on his coat, slammed the locker shut, and got ready to leave. A buddy, half joking, tried to stop him, saying there were people waiting for interviews, fans wanting a word. Jin-ho brushed it off, telling him to let them send a message. His time was already packed, and he had better things to do. The friend insisted. Outside, rain poured and traffic was chaos. Jin-ho grinned, saying that was even better. He'd run through it and arrive quicker. The next moment, the door slammed, and by the time the friend tried to follow, talking about the 30 kilometers ahead, Jin-ho had already vanished. Now it was the reporters swarming the coach, demanding answers about how he had built such a legend. Jin-ho headed home while the coach stood there, heavy with a sadness only he could feel. His mind replayed the first time he had seen the kid fight. The debut ended with a knockout punch. The second, a brutal elbow. Most fights never even lasted 30 seconds. That kind of talent only left a hollow feeling behind. The coach was certain. No one alive would ever stand against Kim Jin-ho until the day he decided to retire. To the press, he revealed the truth. The so-called injured leg was nothing more than a way to make the fight harder. Sometime later, Jin-ho arrived at his apartment, drenched from the storm. The doorway stacked high with gifts from fans. The man wasn't just a champion, he was the world champion, and his home proved it. Inside that apartment building, he had carved out a mansion, a massive domain that screamed victory. Yet what he loved most wasn't the trophies or luxury. It was the glowing rig in the corner, the gaming PC. Jin-ho wasn't just a fighter, he was hooked on games, obsessed with one in particular, Last Savior. A title so brutally difficult that even Korean players, who lived for punishing challenges, had abandoned it. Not him. For 10 years, every single day, he had been grinding, fighting against stronger enemies and terrifying monsters. That was his second life. That was his training. Sitting at the screen, he smiled, hoping for once he wouldn't win like always. On the battlefield, his character stood ready. What thrilled him the most was the rush of facing down a monster. Once again, he was locked in battle with the Demon King, Azar. Time passed, and Jinho's face shifted. He stood toe-to-toe with the towering creature, its health bar almost drained. His eyes locked on the HP gauge, disbelief hitting him hard. At this pace, victory was his. He struck again, demanding resistance from the weakened foe. He slashed at the legs, questioning how something so obvious wasn't being avoided. The NPC flailed, struggling to fight back, but it was useless. Jinho's blonde avatar carved through it with ease, irritation growing at how predictable the patterns had become. Every single attack connected, flawless and unchallenged. A lion's aura flared, unleashing a storm of blades across the Demon King's body. When he booted up the game today, the goal had been simple: fight hard, chase victory. But now, staring at the inevitable, fear twisted inside him. He didn't want to win. He willed the Demon King to endure, to strike differently, to push back. He bent his own commands, even sabotaging inputs to avoid sealing the fight. It didn't matter. One final slash cut Azar down. System messages flared across the screen, hailing him as the first player to ever kill the Demon King. Jinho froze. His expression hardened. He was now champion in two different worlds. The mouse drifted on the desk, his anger boiling. Who was left to face him now? What opponent could exist? His mind wandered absurdly. Maybe he should charge into the storm, find a bear in the forest and wrestle it. But then, in the clouds above, a golden light cracked open, followed by a jagged bolt of lightning. He sensed something racing toward him, eyes darting upward just as the strike slammed into his apartment. The screen went black. Vertigo washed over him, his whole body buzzing with numbness. He blinked, and suddenly the rain was real, falling around him. Confusion spread. When had he even stepped outside? His gaze dropped. Strange orange pants clung to his legs. A hand gripped his shoulder. A voice barked his number, 218. A blonde girl with piercing blue eyes stood beside him, urgency blazing in her stare. The number 172 was printed across her chest. She rushed him forward, warning that wasting time meant death. Still dazed, Jinho turned and realized where he was. Ahead, dozens of inmates were running for their lives inside a prison shaped like a fortress. His eyes locked on one of the flags, an eagle stitched into the fabric. The pattern felt familiar. Before he could process it, 172 yanked him back to reality, reminding him this was their last shot at escaping. If they missed this chance, they'd rot forever inside the butcher's prison. The weight of that name hit hard. The infamous prison, feared by all, now stood before him. Even with the pieces coming together in his head, Jinho was still groggy, dragged along by 172. Around them, prisoners pulled at the gates in a desperate tug of war. His instincts screamed it had to be a dream, yet the sharpness of it all made it impossible to deny. He ran with her, thoughts swirling, trying to grasp how he ended up inside the very game he used to play. In the end, he forced himself to calm down, first escape, then figure out the mystery. Suddenly, he froze. Something didn't sit right. He pulled 172's attention toward the chaos. This was supposed to be the most secure prison of all, yet the place was falling apart too easily. She explained Clark, the director, wasn't there. He had stepped out, and that was the reason for the uprising. But Jinho didn't buy it. He grabbed her by the collar and dragged her the opposite way. She fought back, furious, but his instincts roared. This prison was far too secure to collapse like this. Whoever went through that gate wasn't coming back alive. While 172 struggled against him, the others finally ripped the door open. Celebrations erupted, shouts of freedom filling the air. Dozens poured through, laughing, convinced they were saved. Their joy ended instantly. Blood sprayed, limbs tore apart. Out of nowhere, Clark stood before them. Cold eyes, brutal presence. His voice echoed as he condemned them as worthless insects. With a single command, his troops swarmed in. 172's face twisted with shock, questioning his sudden appearance. Jinho didn't hesitate. This was a setup from the start. Panic exploded. The same criminals who had cheered moments ago were now sprinting back inside, screaming for their lives. The prison walls were drenched in blood, painted red by their desperation. Later, Clark ordered the survivors rounded up. A line of broken prisoners formed. Among them, only Jinho and 172 stood out, not like the rest. While the others seemed like copies stamped from the same mold, these two were different. She stood right beside him, gagging hard, until it all burst out into her hand. Disgusting. It would have been better if she had just puked on the floor. And to make things worse, the moment she moved to vomit, she was punched for it. Jinho froze, stunned by how brutal they were, even toward kids. No wonder riots exploded in this place nonstop. If that happened again, he knew he'd have no choice but to throw himself into a fight. That's when Clark appeared, towering like a monster. He mocked him, calling the kid either too lucky or too cowardly for not trying to escape. Typical, he said. Mages were all cowards, pathetic excuses for rivals. The thought of comparing himself to them was sickening. His face leaned in close to Jinho's, venom dripping from every word, promising that Arohan would regret surviving this day. Then he walked away, leaving the protagonist staring at his own reflection, questioning if he had just been called that name. Arohan. A week later, the sky stretched wide and blue, while Jinho worked under it. The entire day had been wasted stacking rocks. Not for any real reason, just pointless labor to keep them from sitting still. His hands were shredded and torn apart. The man, Kim Jinho, 218, Arohan, whatever he was supposed to be, kept lifting stones, cursing how even that drained his stamina. This body was pathetic, weak to the core. They had labeled him a mage, but when he tried magic, nothing happened. It was a complete failure. It didn't add up. Arohan was supposed to be a name tied to one of the most powerful mage families in the region, and then it clicked. He probably belonged to that family, but had been thrown away for having no magical talent. Knowing their cruelty and sadism, it made perfect sense. A guard barked at him, ordering the rock to be carried to the other side. He obeyed without a word, moving it across the yard. His eyes weren't on the rock. He was waiting for something else. The system window. The screen still flashed. Synchronization delayed due to excessive data. A cruel irony. In his original world, he had been too strong, unstoppable. Now here, this body was stuck, lagging, struggling just to download what it needed. Days passed. Mealtime came, though meal was too generous a word. A bowl of water with a chunk of bread hard enough to crack teeth. He chewed and spat curses under his breath. No matter how hard he trained, with food like this, he wouldn't build muscle, wouldn't build anything. Then 172 appeared, questioning why he wasn't eating the bread again. She reached for it, but he didn't allow it. Something about her felt off. Jinho kept thinking this companion was peculiar. Was it a boy? A girl? He couldn't even tell anymore. Something about this person didn't add up. What struck him most was the question of why someone this young was locked up here at all. 172 warned him to stay alert. Lately, thanks to him, everyone's workload had increased, and the other prisoners weren't pleased. That explained why so many eyes were fixed on him every time he walked by. 172 pressed further, telling him to be especially cautious around 589, the prisoner leader, infamous for his brutality inside the arena. Jinho told her it was safer not to interact, since even being close to him might drag her into danger. But 172 shrugged it off, claiming she already knew everyone and didn't need to worry. The protagonist rose to his feet, saying the truth would come out right now. And sure enough, a group of prisoners started closing in. He muttered that this was exactly the kind of situation she had warned about. At that instant, 172's eyes widened when she noticed the number. That man was 589, the so-called leader of the prisoners, or more accurately, the Bald Gang's top dog. So far, only Jinho and 172 still had hair. That couldn't just be coincidence. The bald leader stepped forward, saying he'd heard the increased workload was all because of the newcomer. Jinho wanted to know what that had to do with him. The response came sharp. It was his fault. Before he could even argue, a massive hand came down, wide as his head, smashing into the ground and leaving a crater. 172 cried out for him, but in the same moment someone caught the leader by the neck. Jinho wasn't here to play. He drove a knee straight into the man's chin. The bald crew froze, panicked, shouting for their boss. But Jinho's expression shifted. This wasn't like before. His strike had done nothing. 589 glared at him unimpressed, asking what kind of weak hit that was. Then he snatched Jinho by the collar, ready to spin him through the air like a toy. The hit sent him flying into the wall like some protagonist caught in the middle of a messy breakup. His friend panicked nearby, shouting for 218. The boss stood tall, declaring that if the kid survived that throw, it only meant his death sentence had already been written. But the timing couldn't be better. Synchronization finally hit 100%. The villain's grin widened, clueless about what was about to happen. It was like someone had finally plugged fiber optics into this cursed system that always lagged. The real fight was about to start. Jinho rose, body blazing with energy, fists glowing with blue light, aura spilling into the air. The bald thugs stiffened, watching as he flexed his hands, shifted his stance, and warmed up his footing. He was already squared like an MMA fighter, inviting the boss into the ring. The boss sneered, mocking him for being abandoned by his own clan and still acting high and mighty. Jinho didn't care for words anymore. He demanded action. The boss lost patience and charged straight at him. Jinho spotted an opening, snapping out a low kick toward the leg. But it wasn't that easy. The boss caught his foot mid-swing, grinning, ready to teach him a brutal lesson. Wrong move. Jinho twisted, spinning with force, and smashed the side of the man's head with a clean strike. The boss staggered, dazed, only for another blow to slam into his chin before he could recover. He reeled, body ready to collapse, but Jinho didn't stop. A solid kick followed, sending him stumbling until he finally crashed to the ground, unconscious. Standing over him, Jinho exhaled dramatically, muttering that this was exactly why he avoided using his legs. The moment hung for a second, until chaos erupted. Every prisoner around pulled out their makeshift blades, cheap shanks so flimsy they barely counted as knives. They all closed in on him. Jinho planted his foot on the boss, yanked his arm back, and made his warning clear. If anyone dared to move closer, this man would never be able to feed himself again. The bald crew froze, paralyzed, unsure what to do. Jinho ground his heel harder into the arm, glaring at the crowd, calling out that too many of them were still standing around. If they wanted to stop this, call the guards. One of them panicked, sprinting away, yelling that once the guards freed the boss, Jinho was as good as dead. But in the end, fear won. The gang caved, hauling their fallen leader away instead of striking back. Later, inside the cell, 172 looked at him in awe, demanding to know how he pulled that off. It was unbelievable. On top of that, she swore he even looked taller all of a sudden. Something had changed. Jinho brushed it off, saying it was the result of hauling rocks day after day. But the truth was different. What really happened was his body syncing with his real-life stats from the game. For the first time, the protagonist had dragged his real body into this world, because it was way more overpowered than the one inside the game. Normally, it was always the opposite. Some weakling thrown into a body that turned out amazing. But here, it was reversed. What stunned him most were the stats. Zed Arahan, loaded with S-rank immunities. Immortal Duelist, Challenger rank, S-rank Archmage. Grim carried everything stacked, but something was off. His class really was Mage. That alone cut his agility, strength, and defense by half. And worse, even as a mage, he had 0 mana, which meant he was losing half his attributes for absolutely nothing. It made no sense. The Arahan family was supposed to be full of prodigies, geniuses blessed with magic. Yet here he was, stuck in a trash body that contradicted everything. Meanwhile, 172 just stared at him, baffled, watching him mutter and laugh like a lunatic on his bed, trying to make sense of why he had reincarnated into such garbage. He forced himself to calm down, running through his options. The so-called growth penalty was cutting everything in half, but still, half was better than 0. And physical strength? That was something he knew how to build himself, even faster. The real obstacle was the food. That slop they called meals wasn't helping his body develop at all. What really drew his attention was the pile of S-rank talents sitting on his sheet. If he had all that and just a bit of mana, he'd be completely broken. Blessings like those were for only a handful of people in the world. No matter. He'd figure it out. He just needed a way around the no mana curse. There had to be a solution. Right then, the silence was broken by a guard shouting numbers from outside the cell. The ones called were forced to line up and leave. He asked what was happening, and 172 explained. Those people were part of the death coup. One last meal, then execution. He nodded, then asked his companion's name. To his surprise, the answer was Ryu, a friend after all. The protagonist introduced himself as Zed Arahan. Zed asked if Ryu planned on staying in prison long. Ryu answered casually that he'd be escaping soon. Zed wanted to know how. The answer was simple. The guard in front carried the key. Zed figured Ryu was planning to steal the key, but Ryu shut that idea down fast. The man guarding it might be retired, but he was still a 5-circle knight. And Clark wasn't just any knight. He was the embodiment of everything that despised mages. In the world of Last Savior, knights and mages had always hated each other, and Clark carried that hatred like a badge. Now Zed had a bigger problem. How the hell was he supposed to escape a prison locked down by a 5-circle warrior? But Ryu brushed it off, saying the trick wasn't strength, it was subtlety. Just steal it without Clark ever noticing. For someone raised on the streets, that wasn't impossible. The issue was Clark himself. The man was too sharp, too alert, and so far no opening had ever appeared. Zed grinned. For the first time, he could actually see a path forward. The next morning, work began again. A guard announced new orders. By command of the boss, the prisoners would be hauling even more rocks than usual. Complaints broke out immediately. The inmates shouted it was impossible, that they'd all die if it kept up. The guard silenced one with a blade pressed to his throat. Another bald prisoner stepped up, demanding to know why they were being worked to death. There was no reason for it. The guard's smirk said everything. He told them they already knew whose fault it was. All eyes turned toward Zed. Then, with a fake cough, the guard walked away, promising to return soon. 172 warned him. It was obvious. They were setting him up, feeding him to the mob. Zed had already noticed something off about these so-called knights. They weren't following any real code of honor. Their behavior was closer to thugs in uniform. Ryu slipped out quietly, refusing to get involved. But judging by his look, he had some kind of plan. He swore he wouldn't let Zed die here. Meanwhile, the prisoners came to the same conclusion. The work would only get easier if Zed was gone. The protagonist smirked. So be it. An unavoidable fight. The first thug charged, only to be met with a crushing knee to the chin. His body dropped hard, a heavy thud against the ground. The others froze, suddenly unsure. Who was next? Who had the guts to rush him now? Zed taunted them, daring the whole crowd to come at him together. The second wave surged forward, and the first to reach him caught a hammering blow straight to the skull. He collapsed instantly. Zed didn't stop. Elbows flew, fists smashed, bones cracked. And through it all, his rage boiled. These idiots kept coming one by one, lining up for slaughter instead of storming him all at once. Another one dropped to the ground, and Zed muttered that these guys had no bite. The moment he caught a glimpse of movement, he ducked low, barely slipping past a strike. He answered with another knee, headbutts, fists flying, chaos everywhere, a full-on brawl. From a distance, Ryu watched in shock. Bodies piled up in Zed's wake, and he realized he had never known his friend was this strong. Right then, someone beside Ryu whispered for him to follow. Meanwhile, Zed drove his boot into another stomach, sending the guy crashing down. As expected, the thugs pulled out those tiny knives again, barely 3 centimeters, but dangerous enough. Zed smashed one straight in the face, daring the next wave to hit harder. And now he was enjoying it. This was his element. His whole life had been built around fighting, and nothing thrilled him more than standing at the edge of death. The rush of slipping past a strike that could have ended him. That was his addiction. It was why he lived for the game, why martial arts consumed him. Another chin cracked under his fist. Another neck rattled beneath his blows. He looked unhinged, completely wild. Then, suddenly, a heavy foot landed on his back, someone roaring his name. Zed Arahan. A pale, twitchy kid grabbed Ryu and threatened his life. Ryu struggled, biting, thrashing, but held tight. The lunatic promised that Ryu's death by a 2-circle knife wouldn't even be shameful. He lunged forward, but Zed slipped away, vanishing before the strike could touch him. The attacker froze, confused, swearing he had disappeared. His head whipped to the side, and there Zed stood, already talking casually with Ryu like nothing happened. The pale freak demanded to know what magic that was. Zed's smirk answered, "No magic, just pure movement." His body shifted smooth as a dancer, then snapped with brutal precision, slamming a perfect strike into the neck. The pale kid skidded across the ground, dragged like trash. That was when Clark arrived, calling for number 218, demanding an explanation. Before Zed could speak, Ryu stepped in, insisting 218 was the victim. He explained he'd been taken hostage, and Zed had saved him. Clark's eyes swept over the floor littered with unconscious inmates. His jaw tightened, fury simmering, annoyed that his men kept ending up as nothing more than punching bags. Clark's eyes narrowed and he demanded to ask Zed something, whether he had been using mana. Zed, barely interested, shrugged it off with a half-hearted maybe. In response, Clark unleashed his aura. The pressure hit instantly. Prisoners collapsed, gasping for air, choking on the weight that crushed down on them. Even Ryu, who had been struggling to stay upright, dropped hard to the ground. Now it all made sense. Through it all, Zed stood steady, untouched. A translucent mana barrier surrounded him. One of his S-rank traits had triggered resistance to suppression. He understood now. It wasn't just resistance. It was mental immunity. His thoughts burned with arrogance. Of course this was the case. He had reached the peak on Earth, 27 straight wins at the highest level of the world. No average thug from this place could ever make him tremble. Clark, however, was losing it. He couldn't stand seeing the kid still on his feet. His fury boiled over. How the hell was a bastard with no mana resisting his aura? He poured even more into it, pressing harder, the force growing so suffocating it was on the edge of breaking everything around them. But S-rank suppression resistance was absolute. Zed didn't budge. He stood calm, one hand on his hip, unfazed, as if the crushing pressure didn't even exist. Clark's face twisted. None of it made sense. The guards begged him to stop, warning that at this rate the whole place would die. Finally, Clark cut the aura. His glare locked onto Zed, voice sharp. He told the boy to calm himself or he'd slit his throat at any second. With one last murderous stare, he turned away, ordering everyone back to work. But Zed wasn't done. He called out, demanding Clark stop. He had something to say. He declared he was done with the endless rock stacking, finished with being ambushed by every prisoner thrown his way, and because of that, he was planning to settle it once and for all. Ryu stared at him like he'd lost his mind, asking what the hell he was talking about. Zed grinned. He wanted to join death row. Clark froze, questioning if he even understood the weight of what he was saying. It wasn't a choice he could take back. Zed didn't flinch. He told Clark to record it in a crystal ball if he wanted. His decision wasn't changing. Clark smirked coldly. Perfect. He ordered a registration item to be brought, and right away Zed added one more thing. Since he was now on death row, he wanted to claim his last meal, a birdie steak. The portion was massive, enough to fill him completely. The guards' faces gave it away. It was absurdly expensive. They muttered it was madness. That steak, top quality, came only from the Southern Empire. In the game, it was one of the rarest consumables. A dish so rich it could restore strength even drained by age. Some warriors had eaten it mid-battle, turning the tide with the buff it gave, winning fights they should have lost. But Zed didn't look like he just wanted a taste. He told Clark it was only fair, considering the family he came from and the value of his life. And he warned. He knew exactly what the real thing was like. If they tried to trick him, the deal was void. Ryu couldn't handle it, demanding to know why this lunatic was chasing death. Zed almost laughed, saying he'd forgotten his friend was with him. Now both of them were tied to death row. The staff hesitated, but Clark's voice cut through, demanding they follow orders. An Arahant's life was worth the price. Ryu panicked, furious that he'd been dragged into this insanity. Time jumped forward. Back in his cell, Zed kept training. Just securing that stake took over a week, and he wasn't wasting a second. Ryu thought it was pointless. Why train if you were gonna die anyway? That's when Zed revealed his system. Each attribute capped at 100. Any extra experience overflowed into whatever stat hadn't maxed out. And since every single attribute of his was already at the ceiling, all his gains were being funneled straight into mana. Right in the middle of another set, a guard called for them. Zed's grin spread. Finally, the steak was here. The meal arrived, an extremely rare slab, golden seared, dripping juices. The moment Ryu took a bite, tears welled in his eyes. He'd never eaten anything so good in his life. Zed reminded him not to forget who made it possible. As he ate, Zed could feel his body shifting. Negative status effects were being peeled away, bit by bit. Experience that had been blocked started to flow in. Elsewhere, in Clark's chamber, someone entered with the report. The banquet had begun. Clark smirked, ordering no one to disturb them. But his mind wasn't at ease. That day still gnawed at him. The boy hadn't resisted, and yet, Clark had felt something he couldn't explain. It was as if his magic failed to connect. Even retired, Clark was still a 5-circle knight. A young mage without mana should never have been capable of resisting that. Something had gone wrong that day, something beyond his grasp. But this time, he was certain he'd get the truth. His eyes lingered on the bracelet. The humiliation about to come would be 100 times worse. Not long after, the banquet ended. Both Zed and Ryu were stuffed. Ryu muttered that he was ready for death, but Zed wasn't. His body buzzed with energy, brimming with strength, the same rush he felt after a day of pounding the sandbag. The door creaked open. He turned, already announcing their arrival, already mocking Clark, asking what came next now that every bite had been devoured. Clark began to speak, but Zed cut him down, telling him to wipe that sad smile. Disappointment was all he should feel. There wasn't even a crumb left. Clark's fury simmered. He spat that this brat thought too highly of himself, clinging to his bloodline. Still, he gripped Zed's shoulder, promising agony would follow. A bitter image formed. 40 years old, straining to handle a teenager. The truth spilled out. Clark's real goal was to exploit the presence of an arrowhan. Any scrap of knowledge about that family was worth a fortune. He activated the bracelet. Zed felt it immediately. The man himself was a magical tool. Clark sneered, demanding what he thought of that sensation. Zed didn't flinch. He stood still, completely untouched. Ryu crumbled, nearly unconscious, collapsing to the side. Zed told Clark to behave better. Clark snapped, slamming both hands onto his shoulders, pouring in all his force. Nothing. Zed simply patted his hand away, unfazed. And just like that, the fight was set. Zed warned him. He should have killed properly if he meant it, instead of whining like a child. Clark twisted in rage, unable to comprehend why the artifact failed. The only explanation would be if the boy had a higher magical circle, but his age made that impossible, which left one option: Arohan bloodline, a natural counter. Clark seethed. He had clawed his way to the 5th circle through years of relentless training, sweat, and pain. Yet even a failed mage discarded by his family could resist the artifact. Then suddenly, the bracelet fizzled out, its glow dying, shutting down completely. Zed asked if Clark was finally done with the nonsense. Clark lowered his head, abandoning the threats, muttering that Zed could resist all he wanted. It didn't matter. The decree from the Majesty had already arrived. Execution at dawn. He should savor his final night in this world. Later, back in his quarters, Clark scribbled down notes. He hadn't managed to gather much, but he wrote anyway. Exhaustion weighed him down. His mana drained completely from pushing the artifact. The pen slipped from his hand as his head dropped, sleep dragging him under. Not long after, Ryu stirred awake. Zed, already up, asked if he was finally going to get moving. He told him to quit whining, even if he felt sick or like puking. Still, he acknowledged the kid's quick hands. He'd seen it. Clark almost falling forward like his body gave out. Sitting, falling, forcing himself upright only to slump again. It looked strange, but Zed knew why. He praised Ryu's work. Quiet, sneaky, almost flawless. For anyone else, it would have been impossible. Ryu admitted it only succeeded because Zed distracted Clark. But then he asked if Zed was really fine after enduring all that pressure. Zed brushed it off, while Ryu muttered that there was definitely something off about him. Ignoring it, Zed pulled up his status. Mana still sat at 0, but everything else had dipped to -40, which in his case meant stronger. The brawl had pushed his body further, making it more comfortable to control. He couldn't even imagine how it would feel when his stats hit a full 100%. He turned to Ryu and laid it out. They were escaping tonight. If Ryu had recovered, it was time. Ryu panicked, saying it was madness. Clark would notice them the second they made a move. Zed smirked. Not a chance. Clark was asleep. The reason was obvious. The bracelet drained an absurd amount of mana, leaving nothing but exhaustion behind. Zed had seen the moment it powered down earlier, and that told him everything. Clark would be out cold. On top of that, he carried the keys. The moment to escape finally came, and both of them rose. Ryu hesitated, but Zed reminded him the hardest part was already done. One swift kick shattered the bars, sending them crashing to the floor. A few scraps of metal were never going to hold him. On the other side, guards immediately reacted, demanding to know what was happening. Zed didn't waste time. Of course, it was obvious. He was breaking out. Before they even realized what hit them, the two were already sprinting through the yard. But the guards weren't unprepared. They had already formed a line at the gate. Poor bastards. The one standing in the center might as well have written his will. Against Zed, he had no chance. Shots were fired, but Zed charged forward without slowing, Ryu trailing behind, terrified. The first guard in his path looked old enough to have 6 kids Zed's age. Zed blew past him, slipping by with ease before planting a palm into his face and bowling him straight into another. Both collapsed in a heap. The next guard didn't even get the chance to blink. Zed's strike crushed his jugular, dropping him instantly. Zed cut in from the right, tearing through the formation. The first man he'd thrown down was stomped into the dirt again, while the others, instead of fighting back, focused only on covering themselves. One desperate fool swung his sword, but Zed ducked low, spun, and drove his heel into the man's ribs. The crack echoed as the guard folded, crumpling onto his own legs. Another blade came down. Zed braced a hand against the ground, blocked it with fluid motion, and fired off another brutal kick. Bodies kept hitting the ground. One man slammed face first into the dirt. Two more rushed from behind. Zed's grin stretched wider. He was enjoying every second of it. A single kick sent one guard flying into the other, both collapsing together. Ryu watched, speechless, unable to believe what his eyes were showing him. By the time it was over, the yard looked like a battlefield. Meanwhile, Clark woke to chaos. His face twisted with disbelief as he realized he had dozed off at the worst possible time. His men were scattered across the ground, begging for mercy, and number 218 was gone. He ordered the hunt to begin immediately, but the scene shifted. A quiet village hotel not far from the prison. Ryu kept scanning the area, nervous, checking every corner for signs of pursuit. The two of them stood out like flames in the dark, still dressed in their glaring orange uniforms. At least Ryu knew the streets and alleys of the region. Ryu started showing Zed around, explaining how things worked. The first priority was blending in with the locals. Their solution was simple: rob a beggar's stash and steal his clothes. That was the best disguise they were going to get. Next came food. Zed questioned how they'd manage that without a single coin, but Ryu, slippery little thief that he was, just smirked. He'd handle it with ease. He even told Zed to stay behind like some background character while he took care of business. 1 or 2 hours later, Zed's appearance had changed. His eyes were now a different color, thanks to a contact lens Ryu had brought back. They were in the southern region, where blue eyes were a trend, tied to the legacy of an old hero. Zed figured it came from the Sword X family, the clan the protagonist Tora once belonged to. Their sworn enemies were the Arahans, complete opposites even in appearance. Sword X carried blue eyes. Arahans bore red, which meant walking around with glowing red eyes would have been suicide. Later, the two found themselves in a forest cabin. Reality was only now settling in. Zed couldn't shake the thought, how the hell had he ended up trapped inside a game? And what kind of absurd situation left him sleeping in a stable, claiming life was at least entertaining this way? Zed, though, wanted answers. Why was this lunatic always stuck to him like glue? Why did he keep calling him a side character, like it was some kind of running joke? He didn't understand it. For now, he'd keep Ryu close. He still needed the help, but he'd stay cautious. Trust didn't come easy. Loneliness weighed on him. It made sense. He was 40 years old, a man who had spent his whole life fighting and gaming. His house back in the real world had been empty. No one there. Morning came, and with it, the realization that none of this had been a dream. Zed woke in the shabby cabin, still stuck in this new reality. Ryu laughed, impressed that a noble like Zed could actually sleep in a place like that. Zed asked if he liked it here, but Ryu only gave the obvious answer. There was no such thing as liking when you were poor. You sleep wherever you can. Zed might have hijacked someone else's life halfway through, but in his old one, he had been loaded. And like a true capitalist, he got up declaring it was time to make money. Because you can't level up, can't get stronger, if you don't even have a bed to crash on or food to eat. Ryu argued it wouldn't be easy. Clark's men were hunting them, and sooner or later, they'd be caught. Zed asked if he meant stealing, but brushed it off. No way. You'd never get rich fast enough in this dump by picking pockets. The only real option was money earned the hard way. The arena. And just like that, they were there. In the underground pit where sand kicked up with every stomp, where fighters locked foreheads and fists did the talking. Zed's smug grin said it all. If there was one place he belonged, it was here. The crowd went insane, packed in shoulder to shoulder, roaring as the fights turned savage. Ryu already doubted everything, swearing this had to be the wrong place. But Zed? He was locked in. To him, this was perfect. Inside the pit, one guy sank his teeth into an opponent's shoulder, only to get blasted across the face with a cannon punch. Spit, blood, and sand flew, chaos everywhere. No rules, just survival. Punches to the ribs, bites, headbutts, anything went. The audience loved it. Ryu looked horrified, but Zed cheered like a man possessed. The fights were sharper than he'd expected. He thought he'd see nothing but amateurs, but these brawlers actually had skill. Then came the monster, Walmart Ujiro Hanma barreling in, fists swinging. He hammered the big guy with a clean shot, then strung together a brutal combo that left the man broken. Ryu panicked, shouting at Zed to rethink this madness, but when he turned, Zed was gone. The audience erupted in confusion. The beast of a fighter stood with blood on his hands. only for the crowd to gasp. Zed stood there, gripping his opponent's arm, calm, cold, telling him to ease up. The brute froze, thrown off balance, unsure what he was facing. Ryu thought his friend had lost his mind, and the women in the stands screamed at the referee, asking if he'd been paid to just let someone die out there. Ujiro tore his arm free from Zed's grip, demanding to know if this brat was some noble with a death wish. But Zed denied it flatly. His look alone should have been enough. He was nothing but a street rat. The crowd erupted, jeering, demanding Ujiro crush the kid who had dared to interrupt the fight. Zed welcomed it, claiming he'd take full responsibility with a battle worth their attention. Ryu panicked, ranting in his ear, spitting out a storm of protests, but Zed silenced him. All his friend needed to do was bet everything he had on him. Ryu resisted, but Zed reminded him the steak they ate had been far too good. After this, they'd be feasting again. The fighters squared off. Ujiro sneered, calling the kid insane, but at least he didn't look afraid. Then something about Zed made his eyes narrow. His stance was sharp, breathing steady, gaze sharp with a killing aura. His posture was cleaner, deadlier than anyone Ujiro had ever faced in that pit. A chill ran through him. Fear? Impossible. How could he be shaken by a kid? Furious, he rushed forward, convinced none of it made sense. But his charge was cut short. Zed's fist snapped across his cheek like a cannon blast. Blood gushed from his nose instantly. Zed mocked him, breaking him down like a coach scolding a rookie. You never start a fight with a punch that comes from behind the shoulder. He punished him with a rapid combo, each strike cracking into Ujiro's jaw. Zed explained it mid-beatdown. You always keep your arm forward, defense and attack in one. Ujiro was helpless, his face battered by a storm of machine gun punches. Blow after blow, his features swelled, his defense shattered. Ryu had his eyes shut tight, whispering desperate prayers. When he finally cracked them open, he saw Ujiro already on his knees, broken in the dirt. Zed stood there, smirking, calm as ever. Ryu was in disbelief, but why? Had he forgotten Zed had already destroyed an entire prison block on his own? Poor Ujiro gasping, vision blurring, seeing only shadows. He couldn't accept it. Losing to a kid in front of everyone, it was the ultimate humiliation. Ujiro swung one last desperate punch, but Zed slipped past it like nothing and went full barrage again. A clean final strike cracked across the pit, dropping him flat on his back. Zed didn't waste time. He turned to the referee, demanding the match be called. He'd already won, but this was a betting house. The ref knew if he announced Zed the winner, the crowd would riot. Still, he had no choice. Ujiro wasn't moving. The call was made. Zed, the victor. Zed brushed it off, saying the fight wasn't even a warm-up. Later, with a bag of coins in hand, he scowled. It was too light. He asked why there was so little when 60 people had bet against him, and only one had bet in his favor. The bookie swore the math was right. The payout followed the system exactly. Zed pressed harder. With that kind of betting pool, the prize should have been massive. He called Ryu over, and one look at his face told the truth. He hadn't bet everything. Before Zed could rip into him, someone new appeared. Tall, long blue hair flowing, draped in a red dress. She had presence, that much was clear. But her face, pure villain, trouble written all over it. She stepped closer, saying she wanted a chat. Zed brushed her off, asking who she even was. She smirked, claiming it was obvious this was his first time here if he didn't know her. She introduced herself as Herna, the owner of the arena. But Zed wasn't interested. He walked right past, saying it was good to know but he wasn't here for conversation. Ryu's gut twisted. This wasn't going to end well. Sure enough, two giants stepped forward, blocking Zed's path like a living wall, iron jaws, shoulders like boulders. Zed tilted his head up, unfazed, warning them flatly that if they didn't move, they'd all end up on the ground. The guards exchanged confused looks, thinking the kid had completely lost it. And from behind, Herna's voice cut in. The warrior Zed had just beaten. He wasn't some local brawler. He had been brought in straight from the big city. He needed to understand the weight of her words. She would let him walk away today, but the next time, it would be on her terms, somewhere far less forgiving, dangerous. That woman played with fire, and Zed knew it. She liked strong men, and that alone made her even more of a threat. But somehow, he slipped away untouched. The next day, the two sat inside a bar. Ryu looked drained, glaring at Zed, calling him insane for standing so boldly in front of that woman. Didn't he realize? She controlled everything in that arena. Zed brushed it off, calling her nothing more than an old fox obsessed with money. Ryu admitted he was right. She was known as the Fox, and getting close to Zed had probably been her attempt to squeeze some advantage out of him. It wasn't the first time Zed had been branded a genius. Back in his rise, once the wins started stacking and his name began spreading, he was bombarded with offers, contracts, promises, endless deals. Naive at the time, he'd been scammed more than once, but by luck, he'd found a manager who had made him a world champion. Those experiences carved the truth deep into him. At the top, the only ones who survived were those who knew when to bite back. He'd called her an old fox for her wisdom. Soon, they'd see which of them was truly wiser. The meal they ordered finally arrived. Expensive meat, finely served. Ryu was ready to devour it instantly, but Zed stopped him. Something was off. The quality was nowhere near what they had ordered. No way it was that ultra-rare birdie steak. If it was, it wouldn't be available to every drunk sitting in that bar. Ryu waved it off, claiming food was food. Once in the stomach, it didn't matter. Zed didn't budge. If they paid for a birdie steak, then they'd damn well get one. He waved down a waiter. The man snapped at him, saying if he wanted to complain, he should leave, because no one wanted him around. Zed ignored him completely, stating flatly the steak was fake and they'd better bring the real one before talking back to him. The waiter scoffed, calling him crazy. Zed demanded to see the boss. That sealed it. The waiter thought the street rat had lost his mind, but he smirked anyway, saying fine, if he really wanted to meet the boss, then follow. The path, of course, led nowhere good. Inside the office sat a fat man surrounded by thugs, knives already raised and aimed at the door. The boss asked if Zed was the customer causing all the trouble. Zed answered that the real troublemakers were the ones selling fake goods in this dump. The fat man waved a hand, sending his first thug forward, saying the kid didn't understand the mess he'd walked into. But Zed was already smiling. Another fight. Another bit of fun. The bar's thugs rushed him, poor fools. Every one of them ended up the same. Faces smashed, bones snapped. One had his arm twisted and broken. Another dropped from a strike to the neck. Another flipped flat on his back after a clean counter. The fat boss, who had been laughing at first, quickly realized the tide had shifted. His men were scattered across the floor, broken and groaning, while Zed stood alone in the center, untouched. Ryu shouted a warning. This was the same kid who had dropped Walmart Ujiro. The boss froze. He'd heard whispers about that fight, but thought it was nothing more than rumor. Navi asked what Zed wanted. Zed laid it out clear. First, they'd return the money he had paid. Second, they'd cover the cost of the steak at the proper price of a real birdie steak. The fat man roared, calling them nothing but crooks. But the deal was made. Later, Ryu collapsed onto a soft bed, grinning like a fool, saying he'd never slept anywhere this comfortable. He rolled over, praising Zed as expected of someone from a powerful, noble family. Zed answered simply, negotiation was easy when you had power. Another night passed. As usual, Ryu had that strange look on his face in the dark. Out of nowhere, he sat up and called for Zed, asking if he was ready. Zed didn't answer, so Ryu left. But Zed was wide awake, watching him go, having seen everything. Days later, Ryu barged into the room, complaining he was starving, asking when they were heading out to eat. Zed, as always, had been training non-stop. Ryu asked how he never took a single break. Zed stood, pulling up his stats. Unfortunately, they weren't moving anymore. No matter how much he trained, mana remained locked at 0. He figured maybe it was because he was pushing from nothing to 1. The hardest part was dragging on. It was taking longer than expected. Zed turned to Ryu, announcing training was done. Time to get a steak for breakfast. 3 days had passed since their last visit, enough time for the staff to recover. Last time, they had devoured 10 portions, leaving the place in such a mess the workers ended up paying them instead. Zed asked how many coins were left. Ryu admitted they were almost broke, claiming the cost of living in the city was insane. Zed nodded, but inside he knew better. This was a game he had played for 10 years. He understood the economy here. 50 gold coins. That was their earnings. Not the kind of fortune that should vanish in just a few days. Maybe Ryu thought he was stupid, just some naive noble with no clue how the world worked. But Zed wasn't blind. Was it greed? Was he hiding something? Or maybe some addiction eating away at their stash? For now, he decided to play along, acting like he hadn't noticed. Ryu hadn't shown any signs of betrayal yet, but sooner or later he'd figure it out. At the bar, one of the men cracked the door open, reporting to the boss that the two had arrived. This time, they had a plan. Orders were given, get everyone ready. The moment Zed stepped inside, he was welcomed with a candlelit banquet. The waiter greeted him warmly, urging him to feel at home. Too warm, too fake. Zed's instincts screamed. Why the sudden hospitality? His eyes scanned the room. No assassins hidden in the shadows. The restaurant looked normal, just like always. Then Ryu broke his focus, wrapping meat and lettuce together and offering it to him. Zed grabbed his hand, agreeing to eat, but keeping his guard up, eyes sweeping the room. The instant he bit down, he felt it. Something was off. He barked for Ryu to spit it out. Ryu spat immediately, panicked, demanding to know what poison trick this was. Zed analyzed calmly. The dose was small, not lethal, but no question about it. Something was happening behind the scenes. Zed pulled up his status screen and instantly understood why the staff had been so friendly. Absolute poison resistance. The trick had no effect on him. Still, he knew the truth. If he kept eating endlessly, eventually even that wouldn't save him. Ryu pressed him, asking if he was really sure it was poison. He hadn't smelled anything, hadn't noticed a thing. So why couldn't they eat? Zed brushed it off, saying it was because he was an Arohan, a deflection. Ryu snapped, angry at the arrogance. So that was it. His noble blood made him untouchable. The smile that crept across Zed's face was sharp. Time to make these bastards pay for trying something like that. Not long after, the boss arrived, furious, demanding to know what they wanted with him. Zed sat calmly at the back of the table, saying he was only curious and had questions. The boss's eyes darted to the empty plates. They'd eaten everything. The poison should be tearing them apart by now. The boss cut him off, saying he wasn't here to answer anything. He wouldn't waste words on brats trying to shake him down. Zed leaned forward, telling him he was the one misunderstanding the situation. He told Ryu to pass over some food so they could talk properly. Ryu, reluctant, handed over a meat roll he'd been holding for nearly an hour. The fat man just stood there, confused, demanding to know why they'd offer something like that. Zed told him it was a peace offering. If he ate, then he'd accept whatever terms came after. The boss snarled that he had no interest in peace. He wouldn't bow to a kid. Zed pressed harder. Maybe the man just enjoyed giving away his money, or maybe there was another reason he wouldn't touch the food, like the fact that it was poisoned. The fat man stammered, unable to answer. Zed slammed his foot into the table, flipping it. Meat scattered across the floor. His voice cut through the room. He'd been merciful up until now. But if this trash wanted to suffer, he'd give him plenty. The boss, sweating, smacked the wall, insisting there was no poison. He demanded proof. If they could show it, he'd admit it. Zed reached to his face, peeled out the contact lens, and revealed the truth. The red glow of an Arohan. The fat man's eyes went wide. Terror gripped him. He stumbled back, dropped hard to the floor, and collapsed onto his knees, begging, crying, apologizing. He swore he hadn't known. He hadn't realized he was dealing with a noble. The desperation bled from his voice as he pleaded, asking why someone from a house like that was out here, pretending to be a beggar. In that instant, Zed understood something crucial. The Arohan name carried far more weight than he had ever imagined. He asked the fat man if he would obey anything he commanded. The man, trembling, said yes. Zed laid out his first condition. His identity must remain a secret. The man agreed instantly. Then came the second condition. Half of all the boss's wealth would be handed over, and in exchange, Zed would act like none of this had ever happened. The Arohan reputation was so terrifying, Zed almost expected resistance, but the man didn't argue. No hesitation. He rushed out, vowing to bring the money quickly before the boy could change his mind. Zed slid the lenses back over his eyes. Ryu smirked, praising him, saying the Arohan name alone had crushed the man into submission. But Zed warned this would be their last night in the city. Before the thought could settle, someone else walked in. Arms crossed, eyes sharp, Herna. She claimed it was good to finally meet again. She praised him, saying he was even more impressive than she had expected. Zed froze. Did she know? Had she discovered his Arohan bloodline? For a second, it made sense, until he noticed the fat man shaking his head in denial, clearly terrified of revealing it, which meant Herna's information had probably come from the prison. If the boss realized Zed was just an abandoned Arohan, their deal would collapse. He had to end this quickly. He agreed to a private talk with her. Sitting across the table, he asked why she was here, why she was after him. Herna tilted her head and told him he was mistaken again. She hadn't come for him. She was there for a client. That was when Zed realized. The client was Ryu. Ryu apologized, admitting what he had done. Herna said she was sorry as well, but her side of the deal hadn't been completed yet. Ryu exploded, furious, saying that wasn't what they had agreed on, that he had already paid a fortune. But Herna shut him down, saying it was impossible. The person he wanted had been gone for too long. Alive or dead, nobody knew. Zed finally pieced it together. The real situation was clear now. He told her things would be handled differently. If she wanted to negotiate, then she would be negotiating with both of them. In short, Zed agreed to help Herna, but only if she solved Ryu's problem first. Herna thanked him, saying her request was simple. All she wanted was for him to fight Walmart Ujiro again. Ryu immediately called it a trap, but Zed didn't hesitate. He accepted on the spot. Herna, with that lip-filler smile, promised she'd keep her word. Later, the two walked through the streets. Ryu carried a small pouch of coins, his face dark. Zed asked why he looked like that. They'd made plenty of money. Ryu admitted he was sorry. He hadn't wanted to keep things hidden. Since Herna knew the city and everyone passing through, he thought she could be a good lead, but he should have told Zed before making the deal. Zed told him it was fine. He'd known from the start Ryu was stealing money. That stunned Ryu, but Zed added that he'd only just figured out the money was going straight to Herna. Ryu demanded to know why he hadn't said anything. Zed shrugged, because he didn't care. The help Ryu had given him was worth more than those coins. But he warned him, he wasn't the type to let things slide forever. From now on, there would be no more secrets. No matter where he came from, Ryu couldn't act like trash. He apologized, swearing he'd never do it again. Even so, he begged Zed not to take the fight. They could just grab the money and disappear. Zed asked how he expected to find his brother if they ran. Ryu's voice broke. He already knew. Herna was going to scam them again. Zed thought about it. Ryu wasn't an idiot. His choice to go to Herna meant he was desperate. He knew it was a bad deal. He knew the odds were low, but he had no other way. And Herna? She was the kind of predator who thrived on desperate kids like him, bleeding them dry, then tossing them aside. Zed admitted he'd thought about running too, but he changed his mind. Ryu begged him to quit while he could. He trusted Zed's skill now, but Herna would definitely rig the match. No doubt. Zed only smirked. That was exactly why he wanted the fight. Nothing felt better than clearing trash from his path. He was certain Herna had gone all out, stacking every cheat, every dirty trick just to make him lose, which made it perfect. Back in the prison, the hunt was still on. Clark's men hadn't stopped searching. One soldier stepped forward, reporting that every unit was ready. Clark slammed the table, roaring that this time they'd finish it. The rat who had been hiding under their noses would die today. From this day on, that damned Arohan would not leave alive. 3 days later, the arena roared. Walmart Ujiro raised his arms high, bellowing that today he'd kill the kid. Zed couldn't believe the man's confidence, especially after the beating he'd already taken. Ryu was still trying to pull him back, saying they could still escape while they had the chance, but it was too late. The two stood face to face, the fight everyone had been waiting for. The flamboyant pit fighter against the so-called street beggar. Then it happened. The stance. The crowd's faces shifted instantly, murmurs spreading. Ryu whispered that things had just turned serious. Ujiro had mirrored Zed's posture exactly. The big man thought to himself that Herna had to be running something solid behind the scenes. That was the only reason he'd agreed to fight again. Because an Arohan with no mana? Impossible. Unless the rumors of him being abandoned in prison were true. He charged, determined to test it himself. Zed slipped past the first strike with ease. But this time, it was Ujiro speaking mid-fight, claiming he'd practiced the advice Zed gave him before. And it had worked. Zed dodged again, realizing with a hint of surprise that the man wasn't lying. He had trained. He had listened. Then Zed caught something. The way Ujiro's body shifted, the way he positioned himself. Something new, something different. Bam! Zed's strike cracked against the side of Ujiro's head. The big man staggered, twisted up, smoke almost rising from his forehead. Then, out of nowhere, Ujiro started grinning. He shouted that the brat really didn't have any mana. The crowd roared. People pointed out how tough Ujiro looked today, cheering his name louder and louder. But Zed had already figured it out. The overbelt. An item that reduced 90% of physical damage. Ridiculous in a fight like this. Normally it was simple to deal with. Just hit with mana and bypass it. But Zed had none. From the corner, Ryu tried to make sense of it, stunned at how easily Ujiro was shrugging off the hits. He warned Zed to be careful, convinced Herna had tampered with the fight. Zed only grinned, telling him to watch closely. Ryu couldn't understand it. Why the hell was he smiling like that? Ujiro asked if he was ready to give up. Zed loosened his shoulders, saying he was more surprised than anything. Immediately, Ujiro noticed. Zed's stance had shifted. He was about to say something when another blow cracked across his head. Even with the belt's 90% resistance, his ear was already purple, necrosis setting in. Then came a crushing kick to the gut. Ujiro stumbled back, confusion in his eyes. How the hell was he taking real damage through the belt? Zed's grin stretched wider. This was rare. A fight where he could cut loose, use every ounce of strength without ending it in seconds. In the ring, any time he fought at full force, his opponent was out cold in less than a minute. He'd never had the chance to go all out, until now. And in front of him was a man still standing after all those kicks. Zed couldn't help himself. He wanted to hit him again, just to feel it. Ujiro raised his arms high, convinced another high kick was coming. Instead, Zed's strike smashed into his ribs. The guard crumbled. Ujiro took a blow straight to the face. He dropped his guard low, only to get hammered in the gut. The poor bastard couldn't even track the hits anymore. Attacks rained from everywhere, and his eyes couldn't follow. He was done. He couldn't even see the fight. Zed barked at him not to collapse, and as Ujiro tried to mutter that he gave up, Zed cracked his chin again. The crowd went silent, stunned, as Zed tore the belt clean off. The artifact shattered on the ground. A chill ran down Ujiro's spine as he dropped to his knees. Zed demanded to know why he wasn't standing back up. Ujiro opened his mouth to apologize, ready to surrender again, but Zed didn't let him. Another strike smashed across his face. For Zed, it still wasn't enough. Then Ujiro noticed something terrifying. Zed's contact lens fractured, splitting apart, and the red eye underneath burned through. His lips tried to form the word Arohan, but his body gave out, collapsing backward unconscious. And right then, Zed felt it. Something alien surging inside his chest, flooding through his veins like fire. He snapped open his system window. Mana, from 0 to 1. It was small, but to him it felt massive, better than expected. Because with an S-rank Archmage trait, even 1 point meant everything. But something else hit him. Silence. The arena, packed with thousands, had gone dead quiet. Ryu rushed over, panicked, demanding why he'd removed the lenses. Zed pointed at himself, asking if they could see his eye. Ryu shouted back, of course they could, and worse, it wasn't just red. It glowed, brighter than before. The stands erupted. Voices screamed, the name echoing. There was no mistaking it. The crowd bolted in every direction, fleeing, shouting the same words. Anyone who met those eyes would die. What the hell had his family done to this world? Just a glimpse of the eye color was enough to make thousands panic like they'd seen death itself. Not even the cursed Sharingan from old legends carried that kind of fear. Zed knew better than to stick around. He dashed off, calling for Ryu, knowing the guards would arrive any second. Meanwhile, Herna seethed in the stands, furious. She cursed herself for ever trusting that rat from the prison. She rose, swearing she'd take care of Zed personally. The rage burned hotter when she realized just how much money she'd lost. Right man hadn't come cheap. That belt alone was worth over 200 gold coins, now nothing but shards. Add it all up, and Herna knew the brat had already cost her nearly 2,000 coins. She screamed in fury, clutching her face, spitting curses that she should have killed him from the start instead of playing games. Meanwhile, Zed and Ryu were already moving to slip out of the city. The streets crawled with guards, so every step was a risk. Later, Ryu popped out of a barrel, asking if things had calmed down. He told Zed to stay hidden while he fetched a carriage. But before he could leave, a man with orange hair appeared, saying Hermes had sent him. She had information Ryu wanted, and he needed to speak with her. And besides, no carriages would be leaving the city tonight. It looked like the perfect chance to run, but instead, the two turned back toward the storm. Another meeting with the lunatic woman. Ryu muttered it was insane, but Zed had already decided if they didn't settle this now, the problem would stalk them forever. Time to end it. And sure enough, when they arrived, Herna was waiting, guards at her back. Clark was there too, twisted grin plastered under that ugly mustache, convinced victory was already his. Clark sneered that if scum like them really had stolen a key and escaped, they wouldn't walk away alive. Herna mocked him, calling him an idiot. If he'd sided with her earlier, things wouldn't have spiraled this far. Zed shot back that even if he could turn back time, he wouldn't change his choice. And one thing was certain, he wasn't planning to die quietly. Clark drew his sword, aura flaring, and declared Zed Arahan would be executed on the spot. No one would interfere. Zed told Ryu to stay out of it. Clark laughed, calling it pathetic. A mage who thought he had a chance against him. Brave, maybe, but delusional. Zed replied he had a 50% chance of winning. It wasn't arrogance, It was the mental game he always played. Against someone stronger, he believed in that 50%, so he'd never give up. Against someone weaker, it kept him cautious, never careless. To him, every fight was the same, 50-50. Either he won or he didn't. Clark coated his blade in glowing aura, snarling that the brat's confidence stretched to the very end. Clark's aura swelled, ripping through the air as he warned that the brat would die confident, no matter what. Then he lunged, shouting Zed Arahan's name, blade drawn, roaring for him to die. Zed didn't flinch. That was exactly what he wanted. He wasn't asking for much, just a real chance to gamble with his life, to embrace the possibility of losing. And in that instant, he became the challenger again. The mark of the S-rank determined challenger ignited. His expression shifted, the system triggered, and every attribute surged by 10. Clark's blade tore downward, the ground erupted in a violent purple blast, and dust consumed the arena. A crater split open in front of Clark, his blade buried deep into the earth. He stood there silently scanning the smoke, but the boy wasn't there. Someone shouted for the captain to look up. Lightning cracked through the haze. Zed was above, glowing, thunder lacing his body. The transformation had triggered reborn thunder. His stats climbed another 10% across the board. Mana flared, enough for him to wield true power now, the kind only an S-rank archmage carried. It was a scene ripped straight from a nightmare. Golden arcs wrapped around him, like a lightning-drenched version of Killua gone divine. He dropped down fast, Clark forced to raise his guard against a flying kick. The impact sent the knight stumbling back. Zed had always been a monster in close combat. Now he was mixing it with magic. Clark reeled, unable to comprehend it. How the hell could this brat wield lightning? Lightning wasn't just rare. It was a cursed element. No one had resistance to it. Not even the Arohan clan's founder had wielded it. So how the hell did a discarded outcast hold that power? The guards froze, jaws slack. Even Herna was speechless. Ryu, off to the side, didn't even blink anymore. He'd seen too much from Zed to be surprised. Clark slammed a boot into the dirt, fury ripping through him. This was what he hated most. Brats born with power, gifted by bloodline, stepping over men who'd bled for every scrap of strength. He roared and swung, aura cutting the air in a violent slash. Zed bent backward, a perfect Matrix-like dodge, electricity cracking around him. Clark snarled and unleashed another, then another, crossing slashes to box him in. Zed slipped through each one, step by step closing the distance. Clark's blade finally carved in from the side, arcing towards Zed's head, this time convinced the brat couldn't escape. Clark's sword slammed into something invisible, sparking like it had hit an electric wall. Zed's body carried its own natural shield, and in that instant, he closed the gap, driving a brutal shot into Clark's ribs. The hit landed clean, his frame lit with golden lightning, beautiful and violent at the same time. Clark's chest cracked with pain, electricity ripping through him. The arena lit up with a purple blast as Clark staggered back, still holding his ground. He was strong, no doubt, but Zed had become untouchable. Already a master at dodging, now charged with thunder, he slipped past another strike and answered with an uppercut to the chin. Clark's mind spun. None of it made sense. The boy was supposed to be a mage. Mages hid behind barriers, chanting from a distance. And when a night closed in, the outcome was always the same. The mage died. That was law. A law carved into the world. But the brat in front of him had shattered it. Lightning snapped through the air while Clark tried desperately to parry the incoming blows. This was the first time he'd ever seen a mage like this. He had no counter, no strategy. He pulled back, changing tactics, planning to rely on long-range aura slashes. Too slow. Zed blitzed forward, face-to-face in a blink, and smashed him with another punch to the jaw. Clark stumbled, only to catch a crushing blow to the gut right after. The hit sent him flying, his body slamming against a tree on the far end of the arena. Blood sprayed from his mouth, 3 liters easy, while his men rushed in panic, asking if he was still alive. He waved them back, pride unbroken. No one was allowed to interfere. Turning his bloodied face towards Zed, he admitted the truth. He had lost to an Arohan, and at the very least, he should be killed here and now. Zed stepped forward, asking if he wanted to know why he lost. Clark growled, refusing, demanding the brat just kill him and stop talking. But Zed ignored him. He explained anyway. The only reason Clark had lost was because Zed had trained harder, worked longer, pushed himself further. The words dug deep. Clark barked back that it was ironic, hearing that from someone blessed by the Arohan bloodline. His strength existed only because of his heritage. He knew nothing of effort, nothing of clawing from the bottom with no talent at all. Zed countered coldly. Clark should have been stronger than him at this age. If he'd truly trained, if he had kept sharpening his blade instead of drowning in self-pity, he wouldn't have fallen here. But he let an inferiority complex blind him. A knight blaming another man for his own loss had no right to the title. Clark went quiet. He let out a bitter laugh, calling it ironic again. He never imagined a boy like this would be the one to remind him of the true code of knighthood. Clark told him to finish it, to end his life already. But Zed hesitated. If he killed a man like Clark, the Five-Circle Knight, he'd have every faction in the Empire hunting him down. Yet letting the knight live meant letting someone dangerous walk free, spreading his name everywhere. At that moment, the Challenger and Thunderborn talents flickered out. His body dimmed. Still, he lifted his hand, sparking with energy, and the forest echoed with panicked screams. The guards shouted. Herna snapped orders for them to strike him down. Zed looked around. The numbers weren't in his favor. Too many blades closing in. Then something shifted. A strange mist crept between the trees, rolling across the ground like a living thing. The energy thickened until sight itself grew useless. Zed froze, trying to gauge whether this was the work of another mage or something else entirely. It was worse than he thought. He needed to escape. The mist settled suddenly, and when Zed opened his eyes, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Every guard lay dead. Herna's body was shredded before she could even scream. Clark, too, slashed apart by wounds like claws. Zed hadn't even touched them. He immediately remembered Ryu, spun around and called for him. Out of the bushes came his friend, awkward and pale, assuring he was fine. Zed asked if it had been his doing, but Ryu shook his head. No way. This had to be a high-level mage's work. Whoever it was, they needed to leave fast. Among the corpses, Ryu spotted a card, far too clean, deliberately placed. He handed it to Zed. They left the blood-soaked ground behind, unaware of the eyes watching them from the treetops. A figure crouched above, silent, observing. If anything, it seemed likely this was an Arohan, someone who had watched Zed's prison sentence, waiting for him to fail, and now recognized him as the real thing, the future of the family. Later, deeper in the forest, Zed lit a small campfire and examined the card. It looked blank, until he let a pulse of mana seep into it. A symbol surfaced in dark ink, glowing faintly. He knew it immediately, a magic card used by secret organizations for encrypted communication. And the symbol belonged to the Black Mirror, the most dangerous covert group in the Empire, sworn to absolute loyalty to the Arohan bloodline. On the back of the card, a single mark stood out, the number 4. Zed knew the code. 1 meant acceptance, 2 meant rejection, 3 meant a proposal, and 4, observation and protection. So it wasn't just a guess anymore. He was right. Someone from the Arohan family was watching him, guarding him from the shadows. Strange, considering he was supposed to have no mana, but then he remembered. He did now. 3 points. His mana had risen by 2 after defeating Clark, proof that the system worked like experience in a game. And with that, he had unlocked the lightning form, a state that not only enhanced his body, but generated its own shield. The problem was clear. He could only sustain it when the Challenger talent activated. Ryu broke his thoughts, admitting he couldn't sleep. He wanted to know where they were going, what the plan was. Zed answered bluntly. They were heading to Frilda. That was the last place anyone had seen his brother. Keep moving, keep chasing. But Ryu doubted it. His brother might not even be there anymore, and without a carriage, reaching Frilda was nearly impossible. Zed said he knew. The path would be different. First, they'd go through Tamea, the border village guarding the southern defense line. Then the forest floor lit up. A magic circle cracked into existence, glowing beneath their feet. A knight emerged from it, armor gleaming, hair blonde like sunlight. Zed recognized him instantly. Taurus Bahal, the same character he had once played to defeat the Demon King. But this was no game. Behind him, soldiers marched out of the circle, row after row, summoned for one purpose. Taurus swore he would hunt down the Arohan who had disgraced his family's name. Earlier, that same man had knelt before his lord, receiving his mission. Reports told of an Arohan who had escaped a southern prison days ago, a fugitive accused of killing guards and even innocents in the city. As Bahal's successor, it was his duty to bring justice and restore the honor of his bloodline. Taurus swore the oath without hesitation. The order would be carried out. Back in the forest, Ryu groaned, saying this was madness. Zed cut him off cold, telling him to quit whining. It had been 5 days of the same complaint. What annoyed Ryu most was simple. They were the only fools walking straight into the front lines. On the Empire's map, only a handful of exits were marked, and beyond the mountains, every path was swarming with demonic beasts. Each major family was tasked with guarding one region, and the south fell under the rule of the Bahal clan. The destination was Tamaya, a village positioned right on the front lines, one of the first places beasts usually broke through. Because of its location, it doubled as an advanced base, and held a teleportation portal. An absurdly expensive tool, so costly even nobles couldn't just walk in and use it. But Zed had plenty of money after stripping Herna clean through bets and loot. Even so, Ryu wouldn't shut up, muttering about how he had no idea how terrifying demonic beasts really were. Time slipped by, and the night fell again. Zed caught it first. The faint tremor. The ground quivered under his feet. He rose in silence, telling Ryu to prepare. Something was coming. They stamped out the campfire and slipped into the bushes. Ryu prayed it wasn't a demonic beast. Zed hoped it was, but the shaking multiplied. Not one beast, not two, a dozen, maybe more, and that made no sense. For that many to have crossed the barrier meant it wasn't beasts at all. It was exactly what Zed feared. Taurus Bahal and his army. Over 50 men in formation moved like a wall of steel through the night. If they were lucky, they'd just pass. Zed's only prayer was that none of them would notice the campsite, but luck never held. One of the soldiers spotted the traces, pointing it out. Zed knew instantly, if they were caught, it was over. The minimum requirement for that unit was being a 5-circle knight, meaning every last one of them was lethal. Ryu's voice shook as he whispered that Zed should run. If Ryu were captured, maybe they'd spare him. But Zed, he'd be killed without hesitation. Zed shot him a glare. If he was going to say something that pathetic, at least stop trembling. And besides, he had an idea. Risky, insane, maybe it would work. The soldiers circled the still warm camp. Then a voice cut through the brush. Someone asked who they were hunting, and Zed, reckless as hell, stepped out of hiding. He called himself Zed Arohan, madness. But he knew if they inspected the camp and felt the heat, they'd comb the whole forest. Better to face it head on. There was no way to run. If they tried and got caught mid-escape, it would be worse. Zed opened his mouth to demand a meeting with the leader, when a blade nearly tore through his throat. He raised a hand, trying to explain he only wanted to talk first, but another sword was already at his back. He felt the killing intent, ready to trigger a circle beneath his feet, when suddenly the strike was blocked. There was nothing visible between them, yet the blow had been stopped cold. Zed realized it wasn't his doing. It was the power of the unseen protector. A voice ordered the knight to stand down, and the soldier pulled back without hesitation. The rest of the unit shouted into the trees, demanding the intruder reveal themselves. Zed had suspected someone had been watching him, but never this close. And it wasn't just one figure. Shadows shifted, revealing an entire squad surrounding him, invisible until now. No wonder the Arohan name carried fear. This was the unseen power people whispered about. The celebration of that reputation didn't last. Another presence approached. The real threat was here. The Bahal successor arrived, Taurus himself, greeted with cheers from his soldiers. The Black Mirror agents recognized him instantly, whispering his name. But for Zed, the man felt more than familiar. He was the character Zed had played the longest, the one that had stayed with him until the end. Nostalgia almost pulled him away from the moment. Almost. Taurus demanded confirmation. Was this boy really Zed Arohan? Before Zed could answer, one of the Black Mirror stepped in front, silencing him. Zed narrowed his eyes, trying to piece together why they were going so far to shield him. Taurus's voice cut the air. He said at last he'd met the infamous secret organization, though he couldn't believe they dared to stand in his way. To him, this was madness. The Arohan family had crossed the line. He raised his sword high, declaring the price would be paid with their heads. Then another voice broke through, calm, sharp. That won't happen. A red circle flared beneath the Bahal soldiers, glowing hot. Zed's stomach sank. He recognized it instantly. A trap circle. This wasn't casual magic. It meant the mage had predicted every move ahead of time, and only a 7th circle mage could set a formation like that. The mage's voice rang again. Anyone who stepped out of the circle would detonate the spell. Taurus froze, blade trembling with fury. He demanded if the Arohans truly wanted a war with Bahal. The cloaked mage replied without hesitation. He'd already said it. Best to back down. Even Lord Bahal himself wouldn't want to start a war like this. Taurus ignited his blade's power again, refusing to let anyone insult the Bahal name. Zed, however, understood the truth. This was still the early stage. Taurus was only at the 6th circle, nowhere near his future strength. If a fight broke out now, every knight in the clearing would be slaughtered. But Taurus didn't care. He was already channeling Lion's Roar, a 7th circle technique, reckless and blind. Zed clenched his teeth. If the fool didn't back off, the ground would soon be littered with corpses. He told the cloaked mage to deactivate the trap circle before they all went up in flames. The hooded man shook his head. He only obeyed one master, and one of his lord's commands was absolute. Protect Zed Arohan. Nothing could override that. Zed snapped back, demanding why the man was trying to kill the Bahal's successor, instead of simply protecting him. Slaughtering Taurus would only make things worse. If this assassin was truly skilled, he should be able to secure an escape without escalating it into bloodshed. Then Zed turned and shouted for Taurus to stop as well. Otherwise, he'd die here. But Taurus didn't care. He spat accusations, claiming Zed had killed innocents and prison guards. Every crime had to be answered for. Zed tried to explain it was a misunderstanding, that they could settle it with words. But Taurus was already charging, vowing the only conversation would be had when Zed was on his knees. The red circle didn't detonate. That meant the trap hadn't been triggered. But then the air itself ruptured. An explosion flared, and Ryu screamed for Zed. Taurus's sword was blocked mid-swing by a barrier thrown up by the Black Mirror squad. Even so, the impact and backlash were brutal. The shockwave ripped through the trees, and Taurus dropped to his knees, coughing blood. Zed walked forward, calm, and asked if now that he was on the ground, Taurus was finally ready to talk. But the successor collapsed outright, unconscious, nearly dead from the mana backlash. His soldiers rushed in, panicked, crying that their heir was dead. Zed waved them down, saying it was only backlash from burning too much energy. If left alone, he'd recover. Forcing it would kill him faster. The assassins hovered, already preparing to intervene, but Zed cut in. Backlash couldn't be healed by someone weaker. Only someone above Taurus's level could help, which meant only the Black Mirror could. Zed pointed straight at one of them and told him to heal the Bahal's successor. The man froze, shaken. Heal a Bahal knight? The enemy? Zed's tone was cold. Taurus was an old friend. Not a lie, but definitely suspicious. The man flat out refused. He said it was impossible for the two of them to be friends. Zed reminded the mage that mages were supposed to be intelligent. Did the man really believe that killing an Arohan wouldn't ignite a full-scale war? Did he think that would accomplish anything useful? But the masked figure answered coldly that the death of the successors would actually benefit the Arohans. Zed didn't buy it for a second. He knew better. In the future, the demons would invade, and when that time came, everyone would be needed to stand a chance. His patience snapped. In one motion, he pressed his own sword to his throat. If the masked man didn't heal Taurus, he'd slit his own neck, and that meant the mission to protect him would fail. The mage stiffened, saying he couldn't act against orders. If he interfered, their lord would be furious. Zed said he didn't care. He'd carry the consequences himself. Finally, the masked man moved toward Taurus. His soldiers hesitated, blades ready, but Zed explained the only person who could heal Taurus was someone stronger than him. If they refused, the man would die on the spot. So Taurus was healed, breath returning to his chest. The loyal soldier at his side even broke down, eyes wet. And just like that, the Black Mirror squad vanished into thin air, leaving behind a single letter. Sometime later, outside the village of Inumaya, Zed stood before a tent, staring at the new card. Number 9. Abandonment, or survival, meaning simple enough, they were on their own. Villagers whispered, asking if the mist back in the forest, the one that had butchered so many, was also the work of the Black Mirror. Zed confirmed it was, but now their shadows had left him behind. That's when he noticed something off. He asked Ryu how he knew about the organization at all. Ryu shrugged. Everyone knew. Even kids in backwater towns grew up hearing about them. Zed scoffed. A secret organization that everyone knew about. Ridiculous. But Ryu warned him, because everyone knew. That also meant everyone was watching. They could be killed anytime, from anywhere. Zed didn't flinch. There was no need to worry, not with knights who still lived by the true code of honor. Knights valued pride and principle. Mages? Mages would cut down a friend if it meant earning coin. Both sides were extreme, too absolute. But that made them predictable. With knights, you just had to strike at their sense of honor. With mages, all you had to do was name the right price. One of the knights appeared and announced that Lord Hare wanted to see him. Later, inside a tent, Taurus sat across from Zed. He started with polite chatter about tea, but Zed barely paid attention. He wasn't interested. Taurus quickly cut to the point, asking about their situation. Zed replied that he wasn't the formal type. They were both young, so they could keep things casual. Taurus asked his age, and Zed said, "In this body, 15. Another suspicious slip. He just admitted reincarnation outright like it was nothing. Off to the side, Ryu scribbled notes, amused that the two of them were warming up to each other. Taurus eventually admitted that whether he wanted to or not, he owed Zed thanks. His life had been saved because of him. Zed knew exactly what that meant. Taurus was a knight bound by pride and honor, and after playing as him for 10 years, Zed understood him better than anyone. A man like Taurus would never harm someone who saved him. But Taurus finally pushed past the small talk. He demanded clarity about the accusations, the murders of the townsfolk and prison guards pinned on Zed. Zed didn't hesitate. He explained everything that had happened. When he finished, Taurus admitted that if Zed's story was true, then defending himself had been justified. The real question was whether it was true or not. Zed countered, if it had been a lie, he could have just let Taurus die. That would have been the easy escape. Surprisingly, Taurus accepted that logic. It was enough for him. He dropped a sack on the table, a gift, powdered manar. Zed dismissed it. If that was supposed to be an apology, it was the wrong approach. What he wanted was help finding Ryu's missing brother, Ryusei Umber. Taurus frowned, saying it didn't make sense. That kind of mission wouldn't benefit him as a mage. Zed didn't care. It was a promise he had made to his friend. The next morning, Zed was at it again, bright and early, hammering out push-ups, relentless as always. Zed's drive was infectious, enough to make even an onlooker feel the urge to push harder. Ryu, though, was lost, still trying to figure out why Zed had asked for that favor instead of demanding something greater for himself. Off to the side, Taurus observed silently, watching every rep, every movement. There was something unusual about this kid. No Hafellas here, no old characters to blame. Just this boy, standing out. And yet, it felt strange. Taurus's gaze lingered on Zed's training. For a mage without mana, grinding through physical training was unheard of. Mages always called it barbaric, a waste of time. But this one pushed his body relentlessly. To Taurus, it was like looking at a knight without a sword. Useless on paper, yet refusing to bend. What struck him most wasn't the weakness, but the refusal to quit. He caught himself wondering, if he were in a situation that hopeless, would he have the same grit to keep his dignity intact? Right there, Taurus realized he was staring at someone who felt more like a knight than any knight he had ever met. He swore to himself then that he would stand beside this boy as a friend. Later, Taurus ordered a heavy steak feast, the kind of meal that would restore anyone's strength. While he treated Zed and Ryu warmly, the rest of the knights stood at a distance, watching with narrowed eyes. They didn't like it one bit. Taurus commanded them to sit, and Zed watched carefully. As expected, Taurus kept his word, a man of honor through and through. Ryu still hesitated, asking quietly if they should really eat. Zed told him straight. He didn't understand knights at all. Just eat and give thanks. They dug in, but Zed knew better. Nothing this good came without a price. A meal this expensive wasn't generosity. It was an unspoken deal. Then the tension cracked. One knight stood abruptly, saying he felt uncomfortable with the situation and was leaving. Others followed, one after another, until only 3 remained at the table. Taurus apologized, but Zed brushed it off. Better not to punish them. Nothing useful would come of that. Still, Taurus found it odd, this boy asking not to punish men who insulted him constantly. Zed explained coldly. They had grown up seeing mages as enemies. Expecting them to suddenly share a table with one was foolish. Taurus admitted that maybe it was true. Maybe he'd been wrong to even invite them in the first place. But Zed cut through that hesitation, pointing out that Taurus must have had something more important in mind. Otherwise, he wouldn't have called them there. Taurus explained his plan. They were preparing to leave soon, but he wanted to delay the march for a single day. Just one day, long enough to show the others that Zed was not some arrogant outcast, but a young man with honor. One day would be enough. Zed asked if he was fine with that. Hours later, the southern border stretched before them near the wall of Inumaya. A creature was split in half, its body collapsing as one of the knights cheered. Taurus praised their efforts and ordered them to press forward. Zed walked in the middle of it all, confused why he was even being dragged into missions like this. This unit was elite, the kind that handled threats most people never lived to talk about. Every mission ended the same, either with celebrations for those who survived, or grief for those who didn't. To him, Taurus's intention was obvious. By forcing Zed into the line, he hoped the group would begin to respect him. It was emotional, naive even, but it matched the mindset of a 17-year-old still clinging to ideals. The march halted when they came across strange markings. A massive crater split the ground, and Taurus asked if anyone knew what had caused it. A knight beside him guessed it must have been an unclassified beast. Protocol dictated retreat and proper documentation. Taurus hesitated, but called retreat overkill. They weren't even in Danger Zone 1 yet. If it was new, it had to be low level. Others pushed back, arguing that even a low-ranked unknown was unpredictable and deadly. Taurus leaned toward turning back until Zed stepped forward. He identified the traces immediately. Bacillus, a mid-tier monster, dangerous but manageable with 25 knights and Taurus himself as a sixth-circle fighter. Suspicion flooded the group. They asked if Zed was lying. The soldiers spat distrust, repeating the same contempt for mages. Zed snapped back, saying Arahan mages carried a broader bestiary than any knight. They weren't insulting him, they were underestimating someone above their league. He reminded them that speaking so rudely to an Arahan heir was stepping over the line. The knights bristled, muttering more insults, but Taurus cut the noise with a sharp order for silence. He turned to Zed, apologizing, admitting he'd hoped things would go more smoothly. And then the Bacillus burst out from behind the squad, its massive body breaking through the trees. Taurus shouted the command for formation, but the soldiers barely had time to dodge the monster's first strike. Taurus checked if Zed was holding up, but the boy snapped back that he should focus on the fight. He almost got his head taken off by another beast. That's when the truth hit them. It wasn't one Bacillus, it was two. Taurus lit his aura, and in that instant he almost looked like Vlad from Stellar Swordsman, a Vlad dragged out of another world. Around him, the knights flared their aura and charged the monsters head-on. In this twisted world, it was mages who rushed close while knights launched ranged aura slashes. Explosions filled the field, but none of them left so much as a scratch on the Bacillus hide. Even Taurus faltered, shocked that their power wasn't piercing through. The monster's tail rose, spikes gleaming, and Zed barked at them to get down. No one moved until Taurus roared the command again, forcing them to throw themselves flat. But one knight stood his ground, refusing to bow to a mage's warning. Artmoy cursed at him, but it was too late. The Bacillus unleashed a storm of poisoned spikes. Those who obeyed survived. The stubborn one would have been shredded if not for Zed dragging him out of death's path. Saved by the mage kid. Pathetic. Artmoy warned them quickly. The next strike would be aimed at the ground, so lying flat wouldn't save them again. Then he told Taurus to take the left monster with the knights. The other one, the right Bacillus, was Zed's. Taurus hesitated, but Zed demanded a clear answer. Yes or no. The blonde knight finally agreed. He'd lead the squad against one beast, while Zed took on the other. Zed's lips curled into a grin. He said he was counting on them. The mage squad leapt away, leaving him face to face with the monster. Instantly, the challenger talent flared, mana flooding his veins. With 10 more mana, the lightning talent roared alive. Sparks lit his body as he called the Bacillus to face him. The creature roared back, but Zed only smiled wider. Nothing thrilled him more than dangling between life and death. Luck? No. This was exactly what he wanted. The Bacillus lunged, but he vaulted from one tree trunk to another, electricity crackling through the air. He dropped down from above, already aiming for its weak point. It wasn't about piercing through, it was about crushing straight down on the skull. The strike landed. The monster twisted violently, trembled, and dropped dead. Just like that, the beast was finished. Expected more of a challenge, honestly. From its mouth, he pulled out an ingredient, a crimson shard known as Demon's Breath, a rare material that, when mixed with holy water, could potentially be refined into an elixir. Zed stood there crackling with light, arcs sparking across his frame, tiny spheres of energy orbiting him. He explained to himself that an elixir was the perfect item. A small chance to boost stats for most, but for him, with everything already maxed, it meant a guaranteed increase in mana. He waved off the fallen monster, saying he was heading back to aid the knights. Taurus had been holding against the second beast, but a blow sent him flying, tearing him away from his squad and leaving him without defensive cover. Then a flare streaked upward and detonated against the basilisc's head. It was Zed, stormlit and standing tall, asking without words if Taurus was still alive. Seeing the boy glowing with lightning, Taurus demanded to know what energy he was wielding. The knights froze, shocked, recognizing the answer instantly. Lightning key. Taurus asked if that was truly what he was using. Zed confirmed it casually, leaving him even more bewildered. As far as he knew, the boy had no mana at all. Zed explained that he had gained mana recently. The claim made the knight stumble in disbelief. In this world, mana wasn't something acquired. It was something you were born with. A baby might lack full circles, but the seed of mana was always there. If Zed had been born with nothing, then it should have been impossible to ever gain it. It was like someone born with 9 fingers suddenly growing a 10th. At the very least, it was unnatural. While Taurus wrestled with the thought, Zed asked to keep the item. Taurus agreed. The kill was his, the reward belonged to him. Zed smiled wide. 2 rare drops in a single hunt. Pure luck. Later, the knights huddled together, murmuring in disbelief about how the boy had slain the creatures. First off, it made 0 sense. A kid with no mana channeling lightning. Second, he fought with fists instead of casting spells from afar. That's all anyone in town could talk about. Later, in some bar, the guy Zed had smashed into the asphalt showed up to thank him. Zed brushed it off, asked if he was hurt. The man admitted he was fine only because of him. Ryu immediately demanded to know what the hell Zed had done to suddenly get treated with respect like that. Zed didn't bother explaining, just muttered that at least now they'd get more help tracking down his brother. That's when Taurus called over to them. He praised Zed outright, saying he'd actually managed to shift the knight's opinions. Then he dropped the bad news. He had to return home. He knew damn well the family head would go ballistic once he learned everything that had happened. Zed asked if he wasn't worried about catching hell for siding with an arahant. Taurus said he'd already made peace with that. It was bound to happen sooner or later. Besides, he planned to pass through Frinda anyway to help search for Ryu's brother. From a low glance at Ryu, the two of them almost looked like villains. Yet all they talked about was how now, with a noble heir helping in the search, the odds of finding his brother just skyrocketed. Ryu, emotional, thanked them both. The next day they reached Frinda, the southern trade port. Finally, Ryu revealed the name. The one he was searching for wasn't a brother at all, but a girl, Lisa, 13 years old, with long blonde hair down to her waist. He roughly measured her height with his hand and said she'd be easy to recognize, too adorable to mistake for anyone else. Nothing dangerous about a little girl wandering the world alone, right? Zed said they needed to check the records. Slaves already sold and those still up for sale. Basically every house that dealt in that filthy business. The knight agreed. Then Zed told Ryu they'd start with the merchant he once worked for. Soon after, they stood in front of a guarded entrance. Zed told Ryu he couldn't go inside. Meanwhile, he was already dressed in a sharp suit, ready to play the role. Obviously, he'd go in as a buyer. At the door, the guard, trying to act like a big shot, instantly bowed, saying it was an honor to receive someone so distinguished, without even knowing who the hell Zed actually was. The man asked if the boy was searching for something specific, and Zed demanded to know if this was Hamel's trading firm. The man corrected him coldly. This was a slave market. Suddenly he stood up, declaring that the kid clearly wasn't a noble and should leave while he still could. Zed found the claim strange, answering that he wasn't noble. The man scoffed, saying true nobles always referred to slaves as nothing more than products. Since Zed had asked about a trading firm, it exposed him as an outsider. Zed told him to cut the nonsense, but the man insisted he must have been sent by someone named Devio. That earned him a curse and a fist to the face. 10 seconds later, he was wrecked, bloodied, slapped hard across the jaw as Zed demanded answers. The truth came out. Hamel's trading firm had collapsed, and these men had taken over the business. Zed pressed further, asking about Devio, and the man stammered that he was the biggest slave trader in the southern region, another name for Zed's growing list. He demanded to know where the rest of the people from this place were. The man asked if he meant the products, treating the captives like items. That got him another slap. Zed told him to repeat it, then slapped him again and again, each strike hammering in the lesson. People weren't products. Even trash like him should try to live with at least a shred of decency. The man broke, muttered apologies. Later, he dragged open the curtains, revealing the cages. Behind the bars, worn-down men and women sat chained, faces hollow, spirits crushed. Zed asked if that was all, and the man nodded. There were no children, no blonde girl, nothing matching Ryu's sister. It wasn't surprising. Children were the most expensive slaves on the market. A girl like the one Ryu described had almost certainly been sold long ago. Zed turned to the man and told him he was lucky. Today he had the chance to become a decent human being. All he had to do was bring all the money from the firm and the prison keys. Next scene, the man was the one locked behind bars. Zed left him there, telling him it was his turn to live that life. Outside, the freed slaves bowed and thanked him. He had stripped the slavers of their money and shared it among the liberated so they could start over. A golden-hearted boy covered in grit and lightning, leaving ruin behind him. Zed took the chance to sit with the freed captives, listening to their stories and pulling pieces of information about this world. One of them, a white-haired man, introduced himself as Gordon and said he had once worked as an assistant to the Cherville family. Zed told him that if he had served those people and lived to tell it, then he was already lucky. Gordon agreed, saying the heavens must have been on his side back then. The Chervilles had been the most powerful blacksmithing family, the Empire's go-to during wars and crises for magical tools and weapons. But after betraying the Empire, every last one of them was executed. Their name erased, their techniques wiped away, their legacy buried. The Empire, in its arrogance, hadn't spared even a single descendant. And now, with the growing tide of magical beasts, the absence of their craft was bleeding the Empire dry. Gordon's hands, scarred and broken, told the rest of the story. Just past glory, nothing more. Zed admitted it was tragic, seeing such mastery vanish into history. Then Gordon leaned closer, promising to share a secret, a gift of gratitude only because Zed had saved him. Zed nodded. Even so, Gordon glanced around, cautious before leading him outside. There, he revealed the truth. The Cherville's heir, Lactove, still lived. His assistant had died in his place, letting him escape. He had changed his appearance, even scarred his own face, vanishing without recognition. If the plan had worked completely, he was probably hiding somewhere in Myers. For Zed, it was a valuable piece of intel, but also a complication. Someone hunted for treason wouldn't be easy to track down. Gordon only asked that Zed never bring harm to Lactove. Back inside, they ate. Ryu chewed half-heartedly, looking defeated. Zed pressed him, saying he couldn't lose hope just because his sister wasn't found in the first den they checked. Bigger fish were still out there. W.O., for example. The name alone made Gordon's face darken. He warned them to tread carefully. W.O. was leagues above the slavers they'd crushed. Zed, cocky, said he wasn't worried. He had a Bahal squad at his back. Gordon shook his head, insisting Zed had no idea. Devio's network stretched across the entire empire, and one rumor was louder than the rest. His most important client was none other than the Arahan family. Zed stayed silent. Underneath the disguise of his blue lens, no one in that room had any clue they were speaking directly to one. Zed already suspected the Black Mirror was buying slaves to forge into shadows for the Arahan family. The thought sat wrong with him. Why would the Arahans bother coming this far south just to buy bodies? Gordon had an answer, because the prices here were unbeatable. And if the Arahans scooped up all the prime slaves, the southern houses would be left crippled. Zed paused, then admitted it sounded exactly like something the Arahan clan would pull. The problem was clear. If the Black Mirror was protecting DeVito, any move against him without revealing his true identity could trigger open war between Bahal and Arahan. Ryu's voice cracked when he called for Zed, guilt written all over his face. His request was becoming a storm that would consume them both. Zed told him not to carry the weight. This wasn't just about his sister anymore. It was about cutting rot from the roots. Slave traders were going to be wiped out anyway, one by one, sooner or later. The next day, he stood before DeVito's domain, a slave market dressed up like an imperial palace fused with a church. Zed walked in like a noble, silent, cold. The air shifted. Everyone inside froze, startled by his presence. A brood at the front demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Zed only wanted one thing, DeVito's location. The guards warned him he had no idea where he was standing, that even young nobles could disappear in a place like this. Zed's hand brushed toward his eye, and his voice cut sharp. Arahan dogs always reeked of arrogance. Then the lens slipped, revealing the red glow beneath. In an instant, the room collapsed to its knees, men groveling, begging for mercy. At the back, he noticed another figure bowing low. The outfit gave it away. Black Mirror. Low rank, but presence confirmed. And then, from the second floor, a voice rolled out, amused. An interesting visitor, he called him. A man with a mustache descended, eyes locked on Zed. He asked why someone so esteemed had come here, casually noting he'd already heard how this boy had stormed the slave mart and destroyed it. Zed's gut tightened. That kind of composure meant one thing. The Arahan name wasn't enough to bend this man. This had to be DeVito, already lifting a glass, smirking, saying he never thought the kid would actually have the nerve to walk in here. Maybe just too naive to know better. Zed cut straight to the point. From this moment on, the deal between DeVito and the Arahan was finished. Every slave in that mansion would be taken, and it'd be easier if DeVito cooperated. DeVito exploded with laughter, unable to contain himself. The idea was hilarious, so absurd he had to apologize between chuckles. Zed stared him down, asking if the man was really so desperate to die. DeVito leaned forward, grinning, curious only to know exactly when that death was supposed to come. He waved off the tension, claiming he had no intention of killing Zed. After all, a guest like this deserved respect. But the lesson the boy was about to learn? That one would scar him for life. Just as Zed expected, this was going to end with fists. His eyes shifted to the hooded figure at the back, hoping the man didn't have too many circles. Otherwise, this fight would turn ugly fast. He braced himself to strike before the others could move, muscles coiled to snap forward. Then a voice cut through the air, someone shouting to surround the building. Zed froze, eyes narrowing. And there, standing firm, was Taurus, rallying his knights. Taurus rages at the imperial decree. His army follows with the order to clear the place. DeVito panics at the presence of Lord Bahal himself. A sword swing bursts forth. DeVito shields himself, trembling for his life. But he was not the target this time. When he opens his eyes, the head of his strongest henchman is laid out. DeVito recoils at the sight, and Taurus calls his attention, addressing him by the title of slave trader. Taurus then declares that DeVito is under arrest for illegal activities and for staining the honor of the Bahal in the southern region. The sentence given by the Lord of Bahal himself will be devastating. DeVito now faces the weight of having the world's most powerful eyes judging him. As he begs for forgiveness, swearing not to repeat his crimes, DeVito suffers the first blow. Before he could even think, one of his arms was gone. It does not take long before the other is lost as well. The scene is horrifying, DeVito left in shock, losing both arms. The only thing left for the criminal was to plead for mercy. Mercy did come, but not in the way he hoped. A swift strike left the place in silence. Taurus regains his breath. A brief analysis of the area follows the result. The situation on the first floor was resolved. Zed thanks Taurus for his support and asks why he mentioned a decree. Taurus explains that it is exactly as it sounds. The Emperor decreed the eradication of slave traders. Zed is surprised by such orders coming directly from the Emperor and asks if Taurus dealt with all the other traders. Taurus explains that he sent squads to every known location and came personally to this one, as it was the most dominant. Taurus then asks why Zed was in that place, wondering if the Arahan intended to clear it on his own. Zed confirms that was exactly the case, as he needed to resolve something there. Taurus points out that even though Zed is extremely strong for his age, it is reckless to attempt such things alone, and he asks him not to try something like that again. Taurus then orders the soldiers to continue searching the area for slaves, and to report as soon as possible. Zed reflects on the look that the severed head on the ground had. It seemed enigmatic. He considered whether the man had not retaliated out of inability or loyalty to Arahan blood. Suddenly, a soldier arrives, announcing that slaves have been found. All begin to be evacuated in an organized manner. Zed and Taurus watch as they pass by, with Ryu among them, very anxious. One soldier reports that around 600 slaves are estimated to be there. Taurus then instructs that if a blonde girl is found, she should be taken directly to Ryu. Suddenly, someone matching the description is spotted by Ryu. He runs toward her, hoping it is his lost sister. As he approaches, it is an elderly woman, not his sister. Ryu grows frustrated with the situation and returns without hope. He and Zed know that girls like Ryu's sister are valuable, and there is a high chance she has already been sold. Zed then encourages Ryu, telling him not to lose hope. The soldiers continue searching, but soon one returns with the final assessment of the place. Everyone has already been evacuated. Ryu hears that and feels devastated. It meant his sister was not there. Taurus thanks for the report, Ryu laments, and Zed quietly observes. Later, everyone gathers as one of the soldiers informs them that he will lead the group to the palace. Taurus announces that the next day they will continue with the decree of eradication and keep searching for Ryu's sister. In the background, one of the horses grows agitated after being mishandled. A girl falls when the horse rears up, making Taurus rush over to check what happened. He asks if everything is fine, until he notices something strange. A blonde girl, exactly like the one they have been searching for. Zed alerts Ryu, who was lost in thought, asking him to take a look. The girl notices the commotion caused by her presence. As their eyes meet, she recognizes Ryu, who immediately recognizes his sister as well. Ryu runs to embrace the blonde, and at last the siblings are reunited. Zed laughs at the scene, pointing out that she must have gone unnoticed because of the hood covering her head. If not for the horse, they would have lost her again. Then Zed realizes Taurus is crying, touched by the moment. Taurus quickly denies it. Moments later, everyone celebrates at a tavern. A plentiful table, everyone joyful, a loud hooray for the day's success. Lisa is astonished at the abundance of food before her. Taurus notices her shyness and tells her she can relax and enjoy the feast. Lisa thanks him, still reluctant. Taurus assures her that since he and Ryu are friends, she does not need to be so formal. As for Zed, she can treat him like an older brother, a cold guy, but with a good heart. Zed reflects on the situation, 40 years old, taking care of 2 teenagers. What a cruel fate. Ryu loosens up, puts more food on Lisa's plate, and tells her she can have more if she wants, because their friends are very rich. He even boasts of being the only person in the world who is friends with Bahal and Arahan. The day begins to stand out as the most peaceful one since Zed entered this world, until a soldier bursts in, speaking urgently. Zed recognizes the man as Bahal's vice captain. Taurus questions why the vice captain is there. The man replies that he came to carry out a declaration from the Lord. This leaves Taurus confused about what declaration he means. Without hesitation, the man draws his sword and points it directly at Zed. Zed grows frustrated with the man for ruining his day. The man then explains that the order is to take Zed. It does not take long before the vice captain leads Zed through the forest. The atmosphere between the two is tense as the captain warns Zed about the rules. Upon arrival, Zed must not make eye contact with the Lord. Zed must kneel before him. Just as the man is about to state the 3rd rule, Zed interrupts. With authority, Zed asks who the man thinks he is to tell an Arahan what to do. The vice captain reminds him that he is on Bahal lands and will be killed if he shows no respect. Zed retorts that it is the vice captain who should show respect, for he stands before an Arahan. The caravan reaches its destination. Upon arrival, Zed reflects that obeying felt like the only way to survive, but had he been fully submissive, they would not have given him the respect he deserved. Thus, there is a fine line between imposition and obedience that must be kept in this situation to avoid catastrophe. The group prepares to enter the palace. The vice captain leads Zed to the reception hall, located on the 5th floor. Zed recognizes the place. It is exactly as in the game. That means he is treated as a guest, not a prisoner, since otherwise he would be taken to the 7th floor. Being on the 5th floor is a positive sign in a way. Zed does not have much time to reflect, as an immense aura descends upon him. Never before had an Arahan set foot on Bahal lands. Zed realizes that the one responsible for the aura stands right behind him, and that person is none other than Lord Bahal himself. The energy is so overwhelming that Zed cannot move a finger. What is most impressive is that the Lord is not using any power at all. That is why Zed is being affected. Otherwise, one of his abilities would have activated in response. The Lord's presence alone causes Zed's paralysis. It is understandable, after all. The Lord is a warrior who has surpassed the 10th circle. Zed simply contemplates the Lord's presence as he walks beside him. The Lord sits calmly on his throne. The two exchange glances for a moment. Then the Lord casts his gaze upon Zed, who instantly soils his pants. The Lord begins to speak. He says he recognizes Zed's spirit. However, this is the place where Zed must show good manners. With that, Zed remembers that he should kneel before the Lord. Yet Zed recalls the fine line he must follow, so he chooses not to kneel. Instead, he thanks the Lord for the invitation. The Lord is surprised that Zed considers himself a guest. Zed explains that being brought in a carriage and guided to the hall is clearly guest treatment. Even so, if kneeling is a tradition, Zed says he has no problem doing it. The Arahan's words leave the Lord astonished. Tension lingers in the air for a moment. Then Bahal bursts into laughter, praising Zed as a man of steel. They then move to a table, where Zed is received with further courtesies. The drink was served at the table, a tea. Zed was without a doubt being treated like a royal guest, at least for the time being. The Lord then noticed that Zed was deeply lost in thought and explained that he had invited him out of personal curiosity, asking Zed not to worry unnecessarily, which brought him some relief. The Lord then questioned whether Zed's search for DeVito had anything to do with the decree. Zed replied that he only learned about the decree after everything had already unfolded. This led the Lord to ask why Zed had tried to eliminate DeVito personally. Zed reflected on having many reasons for taking that action, but chose one truth to answer. So Zed responded that he did it for reasons of morality, since slavery went against human morals. The Lord digested Zed's words for a moment. He then asked if Zed knew that DeVito was cooperating with the Arahan family. Zed replied that he had heard rumors, but only confirmed it to be true upon arriving at the scene. The Lord was surprised that Zed had gone ahead even knowing of Arahan involvement. But Zed answered that he acted only on the principle of right and wrong, having nothing to do with the family. The Lord then warned that the Arahans would not let this pass. Zed said he did not regret doing the right thing. The Lord asked if Zed was ready to face the consequences of going against the Arahan family, especially after being received as a guest of Lord Bahal. The Lord reflected that Taurus had warned him Zed was a mage who understood honor, and that this had been no exaggeration. At the end of the conversation, Lord Bahal noted that it was already late and asked Zed to stay at the palace to rest and, if possible, to attend breakfast. Zed then stood up and expressed his gratitude for the hospitality. As a gesture of respect, Zed used a knight salute before the Lord. The Lord was delighted with a mage who used a knight salute, saying that this was a special day in many ways. Later, in a guest room, Zed was alone and relieved that everything had gone well, though the tension had left him exhausted. Everything had worked thanks to the similarities between the game and the world. Even the smallest difference could have resulted in Zed being decapitated. Zed then realized he was hungry after all that, and at that exact moment someone knocked on the door. A banquet was laid out on the table. The man who served it left the room and told Zed to enjoy the meal. But before satisfying his hunger, Zed noticed something that alarmed him. A letter was placed directly on one of the plates. Zed paused at the possibility of the Arahans having infiltrated the palace. He rushed out of the room trying to catch up with the man. But what he found was an empty corridor, not even a shadow. Zed returned to the room and picked up the letter. Activating magic, he revealed its meaning. The number 0 was stamped on the letter. Now Zed found himself cornered. This meant that Lord Arahan was the one who wanted to see him in person. Zed now had to choose between stopping or moving forward.